Okay, welcome everyone. Nice to see all of you here online and offline. This is a new record of offline participation. Very happy that you made it in ENF 328. This talk is part of the CIS Get to Know Your Neighbor seminar series. As you know, we strive to provide with this seminar series a platform for cross-school exchange. Today, we'd like to have Professor Jean-Pierre Hubaux with us. He's the head of the laboratory for data security here at EPFL. And his talk is entitled Sharing Without Sharing, Secure and Privacy-Conscious Federated Analytics. You might have seen that he published a paper this morning in Nature Communication related to the subject. To give you an idea of what to expect, the seminar will last for approximately 1 hour, with Jean-Pierre speaking for roughly 45 minutes. We will then have 15 minutes time for Q&A. If you have any questions, just put them please in the chat, and we try to keep them up at the end of the session. And we also have the opportunity to unmute yourself if you're not present in person with us here at EPFL. Before diving into the presentation, of course, a big thanks to Jean-Pierre for his availability and the entire team for the preparation of the event. Jean-Pierre, floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, thank you, Jan, and thanks. I'd like to thank the organizers for having me here today. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk at the CIS. So this talk is going to be fairly broad and general, and so I'm going to cover quite a lot of ground. So the problem we were challenged with was actually the following. This was a few years ago. Consider a set of databases that are in hospitals. What will it be possible to extract knowledge from these databases and be able to explore cohort? So cohort, as you know, is a group of patients that is of interest for a given study. And here we have an example of a question that can be asked of that kind. And then the second step, it would be carrying out an analysis on this cohort, right? Which from a purely database point of view is a trivial problem nowadays, but considering the restrictions in terms of data transfer is actually a major challenge that is known as a huge hurdle for medical research. So this is a somewhat Swiss-centric perception that is brought forward by the so-called SPHN, the Swiss Precise Health Network. More generally, at let's say a global scale, federated analytics across medical institutions can be very useful. For example, just an example, to study the side effects of COVID-19 vaccine, right? Where there are extremely few cases here and there, and so it's crucial to be able to tap on this highly distributed, let's say, data sets, while keeping in mind that in most cases it is not possible to transfer the files themselves. So this is what it is about, and it's applicable in the case of medicine, but it can be also applicable in a range of other cases whenever the data is sensitive and cannot be freely transferred. The crucial thing in such settings is to be privacy preserving in the way things are done. And of course, GDPR is a major, let's say, reference, not only at the level of the EU, but also more and more worldwide. So this is something that we pursued in the framework of a project called the DPPH, Data Protection in Personal Health, dpph.ch, that we started in April 2018, and that is going to come to an end at the end of this year. And that, as you can see, brings together people from, ethics, data science, computer science, and genetics, and also crypto. So more generally, the role of multi-site studies. So we have to abstract things a little bit and think in terms of what happens when there are, let's say, multiple institutions that are willing to work with each other. They trust enough to be willing to work with each other, but they don't trust enough to transfer the data to each other. This is a very, very actually widespread case. And so it's very challenging because of the reluctance to share data, the diversity of privacy protection regulations, and so on. So Nowadays, the kind of pragmatic solution that is used is to do something is called de-identification of the data, just strip away the name and birth date and so on, and then use and replace this by something that is in the case of medicine called a code, and then hope for the best. Right? But we know that this does not work because in practice it's possible to actually reconstruct the identities based on the leftover data. The data that have not been stripped away. So this problem has been studied by a number of groups, and there exists already a number of solutions that can be, for example, fully centralized as shown here, or there can be meta-analysis that is carried out, or it can be decentralized, but not, let's say, but without protecting the partial results. This is something that was published notably in Nature recently called swarm learning. Or it can be based on differential privacy, so adding some noise at intermediate results with the hope to protect the data. Or there have been also attempts to make use of crypto with either two techniques we're going to come back soon, secure multiparty computation or homomorphic encryption, but without much success so far for the reason we're going to see. So now in practice, the three first, essentially, it's easy to show that there is data leakage, so it's not good. The fourth one, so differential privacy, is based on adding noise, and as a consequence is fundamentally flawed, we believe, at least as soon as it is necessary to bring noise onto intermediate results. The crypto attempts made so far have not been successful. So what we'll present in this talk is actually the technique that provides data and model confidentiality as long as one entity is honest. So the attacker would have to essentially corrupt all the sides that are involved in order to break the system. No data outsourcing, scalable with a number of parties, and providing exact results. So the as these solutions are not implemented yet, as some of you probably know, the system nowadays relies on the existence of ethics committees. So these ethics committees, what they do, they take as an input the study protocol and a consent form, and then based on the legislation, the ethics considerations and other considerations, blah, blah, they provide a go, no go decision and some feedback, right? So this just committee works. It's very slow, and these people do a great work, but they are challenged by, the fact that it's very, very, pedestrian as an approach, and also it's an on paper, a priori evaluation, but then there is little oversight of what is happening afterwards. And there's a risk of race to the bottom. So the teams that are the most convincing vis-a-vis the ethics committee are the ones who are going to obtain the highest level of let's say, data, and will be therefore more competitive in terms of publications. So clearly, this is not a sustainable solution. And so if we look now at what we aim to achieve here, the problem definition, what we need to be able to do is to enable the training and evaluation of ML in a distributed setting, to provide end-to-end protection of the parties trained data, the resulting model, and the queryer's evaluation data. So the first paper I'm going to refer to is something that we published at PETS, so the lead conference in privacy protection this year, called Spindle. And this relies on several building blocks. The first one is homomorphic encryption, a technique that has been known for 40 years now, at least in crypto, but it's still a bit, let's say, unknown in other fields, and notably in bioinformatics, still completely unknown. But this, I think, is going to change soon. So what homomorphic encryption does is that it enables it makes it possible to make computations on data that are encrypted. So to make computations under encryption. So if Alice and Bob, for example, want to compute something jointly, what they will do is to, so in this case, it's Alice who will, let's say, send her own contribution XA encrypted under her own key. The contribution is going to be sent to Bob. Bob will make the evaluation of the data, let's say, taking as inputs the encrypted data coming from Alice and his own data, of course, here in clear text. And then he will send the result back. and that Alice will be able to decrypt. And then at the end of the process, Alice does not know the input of Bob and vice versa, but Alice gets the result. So this works with two stakeholders. If there is more than two, then there is a more general building block called secure multiparty computation, where you have here 5 stakeholders, and each of them has an input. For example, if we want here in this room to compute our average age without revealing individual ages, this would be possible, right? And so in this case, each of them reveals their own input, so it's, say X1 to X5, and then they run the protocol without any trusted third party, boom, and then it runs, and at the end, each of them receives the output that he or she is allowed to receive, which can be the same in the case of the average age, but can be also something else. The properties are typically that there is privacy, so no party should learn anything more than its prescribed output, and correctness in the sense that the outcome is correct in terms of computation. So another building block is combining those two is multiparty homomorphic encryption. Don't worry, we are soon done with crypto. So the idea is that by combining those two, it is possible to provide a technique by which everything is, there is, if you wish, a public collective key that is the combination of a contribution to the public, to the collective key of each of the stakeholders, and the corresponding secret key is actually never revealed and never computed as such. And this is what provides the property of resilience that I've mentioned previously. So the need that the adversary has to compromise everyone in order to break the system. Now, there is something that is more familiar, I guess, to the people of CIS, which is a gradient descent, which is a well-known technique that is used extensively in machine learning. So if it's just a super simple toy example, just to convey the concept, to assume there's a willingness to compute the best interpolation between these 6 dots. If all the data are in the same place, available in clear text, then it's relatively it's easy. It's going to be a linear regression, or if you want to do something a bit more sophisticated, going to be logistic regression, which means going down essentially following let's say the minimum on this drawing. What it becomes more complicated is if the data are actually decentralized. So each actually data provider here has a partial vision of the world, right? So this guy here has the first 2 dots. This one has dots 3 and 4, and this one has dots 5 and 6. I'm referring now to the dots that we've seen before, right? So these dots here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So in this case, there is a risk that they get trapped in actually local minima that are not correct. So the challenge is to be able to mimic, let's say, the gradient descent as if all the data were available. And this is achieved by local iterations of each of the data providers, and then a global model update that little by little is going to converge to the appropriate solution, right? And so we can, for those of you who are familiar with the thing, we can do extend map reduce for secure distributed learning, which, so conceptually, it's relatively straightforward. Now, in practice, as usual, the evil is in the details, in the sense that the parameterization requires to take into account the crypto and security parameters, but also the approximation parameters or the learning parameters. So there's a bit of engineering to be done here, but it's, let's say, doable. So to sum up, Spindle is going to be comprised of these the building blocks that we have seen, and will provide the solution to the problem that I have mentioned. And essentially supports GLMs, right? So regressions and multinomial, well, regressions of all kinds. So then we ran some benchmarks to check the accuracy. And so these benchmarks provide for different data sets a comparison of what is achievable in terms of accuracy for centralized operations, in which case, so assuming that all the data are available in clear text in a single place. Independent training, which means that what is achieved if the training is done purely independently and then compute kind of average maybe of the outcome, and then distribute without protection, and then the spin, which is the green. So crucial is to see how much we lose when we move from blue to green. And as you can see, in most cases, actually in all cases, the loss in terms of accuracy is relatively modest, which means that it is possible to really reconstruct the same results or obtain the same level of accuracy, keeping the data where they are. Performance is in the order of, let's say, hundreds of seconds with off-the-shelf hardware. I spare you the details, so it works, let's say, with a reasonable amount of time. This is crucial because crypto can be sometimes very heavy, so just to show that with a certain amount of optimizations, it works pretty well. So conclusion, we already have here a system that provides modern data confidentiality of the entire ML workflow, and it has the properties that I've just mentioned in terms of accuracy. Now, we have also developed a system based on these principles, not just a software, but a full system with a user interface and so on, with the help of the SHIV, notably for the requirements, with the intention, and what we have achieved actually is to deploy this system. The system is called Metacom, comprised of an exploration capability and an analysis capability. Exploration means the ability to change, to essentially for a researcher to send a query that goes around the whole consortium and provides a response to the researcher. In this case, for example, who have this the blue phenotype, it goes around. There are 2 here, 1 here, and 3 here. The result is 6. Okay, so far so good. Now then, once this is identified, the goal is to do analysis. So, for example, do something which is called the overall survival curve, which is essentially an estimate of how good a given population, how well a given population of patients performs with respect to a given treatment, and then the linear logistic regression or neural networks. Right? So this we have deployed already last year at the time at which CIS was beginning, and we deployed this while COVID was making everything more complicated. So we deployed this in Geneva, Lausanne, and in Bern at the Inselspital, which, okay, deploying software in hospitals is an interesting and insightful challenge, I must say. And then, so the use case that I've mentioned previously at the beginning of this talk essentially consists in setting an instance of Metco at each of the places and show that it provides the kind of features in terms of exploration and analysis that I mentioned before. This is a framework of one of the projects of SPHN, which is the SPO, the Swiss Person's Oncology project. Then we've checked the legal compliance from the point of view of GDPR. We work notably with EPFL, who is a world-renowned specialist of these issues at ETH Zurich, so in terms of ethics, so mapping essentially the features provided by the crypto you were using to the GDPR regulations. So based on this, we wrote something that is called a DPIA, which is mandated by the GDPR, as you know, Data Protection Impact Assessment, which means that consists in saying, okay, what was the situation before? The situation before is one that is shown here on the left, which is what is a centralized approach with standard pseudonymization, and what is achieved once we introduce Metco, right? And so there are a number of criteria in terms of useful access to the system, malicious use, blah, blah, blah. I'll spare you the details, but as you can guess, red is bad, green is good, right? So, and if you're interested in reading the DPIA, thick document in legalese, please let me know. Then we send this to the Swiss authorities, the Federal Data Protection and Information Commissioner, so EDOB in German, and the feedback was quite positive. They said, okay, this seems to be good enough, so please move on and go ahead and keep deploying this in the country, but don't forget asking also permission to the cantons, because as you know, in Switzerland, each canton has its own data protection regulations with the related authority, right? Federalism. Okay, then we compared Metco with a certain number for the existing solutions. So based on several criteria in terms of usability, privacy, security, and then functionality. I'll spare you the details here again. Well, as you can guess again, so we had this no, red no is bad, yes, green is good. Unsurprisingly, Metco fares better because also it is more recent, and so we were able to leverage on the take advantage, let's say, of the experience obtained by, let's say, competing systems. And then what Jan was referring to is that this morning we, by a felicitous serendipity, the paper that on which we had worked with MIT, the Broad and Schuve has come up it's now published in Nature Communications, and we like to call it the Holy Grail for secure federated analytics of health data. So truly privacy preserving federated analytics for precision medicine with multiparty homomorphic encryption, which boils down essentially to making use of Spindle to medical data and showing it is possible to reproduce data that had been carried out while making use of this technique and without a loss in terms of accuracy. So this is a press release, which is online on the EPFL website. Voila, so this is what we do. So here you see the survival curve. So you see here over time expressed in months. And here the number of patients who are still alive, right? This is oncology, right? So don't be surprised by the somewhat depressing numbers. Cancer is still a very severe disease, as we know in most cases, unfortunately. The result here on the left is the one that is obtained with the data fully centralized. On the right-hand side, you see that we can obtain exactly the same actually curves with FAME. And here you see that the runtime actually goes very, very fast, just a matter of a few seconds. This is for survival curves with a technique known as statistic as a Kaplan-Meier. Another thing we did was a GWAS, Genome-Wide Association study, because this is way more involved in terms of amount of data that is involved. That is, let's say, that has to be coming to the picture, into the computation. So here in A, you see the original approach. So essentially here you see the various chromosomes. And here you see, this is essentially a representation of the p-value. So how much influence a given variant, human variant, has on a given, for example, either phenotype or condition. This was, in this case, it was actually for HIV. And what you see here in B is that essentially we are able to reproduce the same outcome, the same result as on the original one. Whereas if a meta-analysis had been used, then the result would have been very disappointing. So in this case, there were actually 1,800 patients spread among 12 data providers, so each wish 12 hospitals, with 4 million variants. 4 million variants. So now we're talking about relatively big data. And as a consequence, the amount of time that is needed for the computation is fairly high. So here we are talking about a few thousands of minutes. So it does take time. However, there's still tremendous potential for performance improvements, notably by making use of GPUs. So moving from CPUs from GPUs would buy us probably one additional order of magnitude. Then so far these were only regressions. So now if we move to the to neural networks, we said, can we do something that is applicable also to neural networks? And so to put this into perspective, so what you've seen so far, Spindle, you can see it as a kind of degenerated, very simple neural network depicted here. What we've done now with Poseidon is something, let's say, deeper and more, let's say, more broad, let's say, broader family of neural networks. So again, the goal is to protect the parties' training data, the resulting model, and the query's evaluation data. So the paper we published this year at NDSS, which is a security, one of the top 4 security conferences. So here again, so see, what is a system model? So we assume to have n data providers, each locally holding their own data to train a neural network model. And then there's a querier that is actually generating the query because he or she is interested in extracting information from the data that are actually stored here. And then, voila. And then the threat model is a passive-adversary model with collusion of up to n-1 parties, which just means in security parlance that the system would resist as long as at least one of the parties is not compromised. Ça va? Am I talking too slowly or too fast? Ça va? Okay, good. So here we want data confidentiality and model confidentiality, as we've seen also before. And the principle is the same. And the question was, can we do the same trick? So essentially have a kind of, let's say, training of each of the local models. And there's a refinement of the global model. And so there are iterations locally, and there is a global iterations. And by making use of, let's say, stochastic gradient descent on homomorphically encrypted data, we've shown that it is possible to achieve this. Well, so if we go a bit more in detail, so query defines here the queries, for example, training of an ML model on the data that is decentralized here. Boom, there is an offline phase that is, the key generation, model initialization, I mean, the usual stuff that is needed in crypto. And then the next phase will be the elaboration of local model based on the principles that we've seen of the building block of gradient descent, but it can be also another algorithm, of course. So there is this several training iteration on the data locally, and then the global model gets little by little refined and improved based on the inputs of each of them, right? And this is a way to emulate, if you wish, the behavior that would be observed in the case all the data were available locally in clear text. And then after the training, and based on actually the policy, then so the model can either be kept secret for oblivious predictions, for example, it would be in this case a kind of machine learning as a service, or revealed to the query if this is a goal. So for oblivious predictions, we go a bit more into the details. So the query is essentially the key, the information that is sent, the query that is sent to the system. Then there is the so-called collective key switching, because we have to switch from the key, from the crypto key of the query to the crypto key, to the collective key of the system itself, right? Well, so, and then the result is brought back to the querier, and at the end of the process is going to show up at the querier computer with under the encrypted under the public key of the querier, and as a consequence, the querier will be able to decrypt it. So then we have made an evaluation. This is implemented as Spindle is also implemented in the Go language and built on top of a lattice-based crypto library that I'm going to refer to in a few minutes. And you see here, it's off-the-shelf, let's say, hardware, relatively modern hardware with a bandwidth that we assume to be at 1 gigabit per second, which is maybe a bit generous, but okay, you can scale up or scale down if you wish. So here again, we've made some benchmarks and check how much we would lose in terms of accuracy. So you see here, this is done on the data set, the one center and the one right are the Cypher 10 and Cypher 100, notably, that are well known in the, let's say, conventional benchmarks in machine learning. Again, the performance here is not is a no-brainer. So we are talking about tens or hundreds of seconds, and actually, okay, the more outcomes, so it's fine. So we conclude on Poseidon. So as we have seen, the accuracy is close to non-secure distributed solutions. Can be further improved. Actually, one can go push the results here. You see, there's still a little bit of loss in terms of accuracy, but this can be improved if one accepts. Because we in a number of cases we have to essentially represent or model nonlinear functions by means of polynomials, and so if one makes use of a higher degree polynomial, this further improves the results. But of course, there's a cost of a more expensive operation. And the other way to improve things, in addition to the GPUs that I mentioned previously, is actually to, let's say, tolerate a higher number of learning rounds. But of course, this will further expand or delay let's say the computation of the result. Voila, conclusion. So we've seen the accuracy, and we've seen that the scalability is linear with the number of parties or data providers, if you wish, and logarithm with the number of features or number of columns, if you wish, of the matrix, or the number of neurons in each layer. Now, another question is, but so far we have assumed passive adversaries, as they are called in security parlance. What if the attacker is malicious and not just honest but curious? So what if, because here, if we go back to the homomorphic encryption scheme, the limitation is that the evaluator performs blindly on the ciphertext, which means the query has no guarantee on the correctness of the results. So malicious stakeholder here could actually alter the result itself. Now, this is, let's say, a dimension that we haven't considered to be relevant in the case of, let's say, medical data, but it might be in other cases. And so if this is a case, then there are solutions as well that are based on proof systems or on error detecting encoding. But this is something that is still, let's say, work in progress for which we don't have publication yet. One more thing is the quantum threat. Right, is the fact that soon quantum computers are, well, we don't know exactly when, but quantum computers are going to become operational, and quantum computers, as you may know, will break all the asymmetric crypto that is used nowadays in the internet. Voilà. So, which means, so the threat that has to be taken, I think, seriously, and so we have. For this, we have we've actually developed a library called the Lattigo library. Why is it called Lattigo? It's lattice-based in the Go language, right? So it's actually a library that provides a certain number of lattice-based cryptography primitives, including the homomorphic encryption techniques and the secure multiparty computation techniques that we have just seen. And this is now a known, I would say, library. It's completely open source. It is known in the highly specialist community of homomorphic encryption internationally. So now this makes use of one thing you may want to know about this is bootstrapping. Is the fact that in homomorphic encryption, one of the problems is that typically if you want to be able to, in full homomorphic encryption, you want to be able to do both additions and multiplications, because we know that in order to be able to do everything, you need the ability to do both operations. And in existing systems, it turns out that the number of multiplications you're allowed to do is limited. So after a while, the kind of noise that is brought into the system becomes too high. So you need a technique to refresh. Right? And this technique to refresh is called bootstrapping. And so we've worked very hard on this, and we've found a solution that makes this work very fast. And this is going to be a game changer because it enables actually homomorphic encryption also for, let's say, real world scenarios in which the number of multiplications is unbounded. Okay, I will spare you this. Okay, so which means we have published, so actually doing this work brought us to publish in places we were very familiar with, but in other ones that we didn't know too much about. So because we need these various pieces, right? So the Lattigo thing with the bootstrapping is actually appears at Eurocrypt, which is one of the two top conferences in crypto. As you may know, this is going to be presented next week in presence in Zagreb. And then on top of this, we have built the security framework that appears at PETS this year, the conference I already mentioned. Then the analytics platform, the Poseidon and Spindle appear at NDSS and PETS. And then we have medical applications appear in Nature Communications, but we also had another paper of the same nature with George Church of Harvard that appeared in Nature Computational Sciences earlier this year. But then very crucially, we also had to work with the lawyers and ethicists to make sure that everything we do actually is going to be allowed. And this is crucial because as we are talking here about, typically this is the kind of constraints that we are talking about are found in highly regulated sectors. Now, in these sectors, the people who ultimately make the decisions have a background in law, not in computer science, right? And so we have to essentially be able to communicate with them, no matter how different our perception of the world can be, right? So that was a very interesting challenge. So I think now we have more or less understood how to communicate across these, let's say, cultural boundaries. Now, all this brought us, because we received enough traction from various stakeholders to say, well, after all, it does make sense to commercialize all this, and so let's build up a startup that is called a TuneInside that was incorporated in August, and that provides the kind of services that I have mentioned, because it turns out that there seems to be enough let's say, companies that are willing to leverage on data on their own data, but also on data of other, including potentially competing companies, in order to refine the quality of their machine learning models. Right? And so we have talked with people in, of course, in the biomed sector, but also in other sectors such as cybersecurity or insurance, and we see also potential in, the financial sector and others. So we have, let's say the company was incorporated, as mentioned, in August, and then we were lucky enough or convincing enough, I don't know, to raise money. So this is something that appeared actually 2 weeks ago. And from left to right here, you see on the left is Juan Troncoso Pastoriza, and then Romain, our CEO, Romain Bouillet, software architect, Fred Pont, who actually is coming from the EPFL TTO. He's going to be the COO and myself. So now if we, and actually Jan encouraged me to say something about the competition, so which I think is fair. So for these kind of things, right, if you want to do this, to achieve this kind of feature, which is going to be probably pretty widespread in machine learning, and that's the reason why I proposed to have this presented to CIS, is the case where data are siloed and have to remain siloed. Right? Otherwise, it's too easy, right? I mean, you just put the data together, you run some algorithm, that you have the outcome. The exciting case for us in security is that data has to remain siloed. In this case, then one solution, here you have a kind of decision tree. One solution is you go for a hardware-based solution. And this is what, for example, Decentric does, or Intel with Intel SGX, right? But then you have all the, okay, I'll come back to this in the next slide. Or you go for software. Software, you can go for vanilla federated learning. And so this is what companies such as NVIDIA does, but also other ones, which means that there is no protection of the intermediate results. Of course, it goes faster, but then you have to tolerate the risk of the fact that the partial aggregates are not protected. Or you protect the partial aggregates, and this you can do either by adding noise with differential privacy, and this is what Google and Apple have done actually in some of their products, but then you lose, of course, in terms of accuracy, or you protect by crypto. And here again, you can either go, you protect by homomorphic encryption, and there is a company from in the US, Duality, that does this, or you protect by, or people protect by SMC, right? And here additional competitors, including our good friends at Infer, who are actually next door on campus. And then what actually TuneInside provides, the logo of TuneInside, is, as we have seen, leveraging a multiparty homomorphic encryption, which is the appropriate combination of those two crypto techniques in order to provide the highest level of protection without bringing any, let's say, significant noise to the or perturbation in terms of accuracy. Now about the hardware versus software thing. So here we have a detailed table that describes, let's say, the pros and cons of the two things. And my hope is that mankind will resist the hardware temptation. It is fast, so actually you just install the thing, but then you, in some way, if you do this, you get locked in into a vendor. And then, as we know, these systems are currently under attack, and so there are side channels and so on. So, and the retrofit, if things that need to be changed, is way more complicated than in the case of a software-based solution. And so we like to say that what we provide is mathematical proofs as opposed to a vendor lock-in and side channel, let's say, attacks. Let me conclude, right? And I think I'm still rechtzeitig. Yeah. Okay. So what we like to say, what we believe is that we have solved the problem of GDPR compliant federated learning, and the solution consists in relying on multiparty homomorphic encryption. So, which means perform the computations without seeing the data, rely on decentralized trust, and there is no need to transfer the data. We've talked about the scalability. We've talked about the fact there is no need to bring noise to the partial aggregates. And we believe this to be a game changer for federated analytics on sensitive data. And we are receiving extremely positive feedback from the medical sector, because now they have understood the potential and say, of course, we want to deploy this. And the hope is that TuneInsight, the goal, the plan is that TuneInsight will deploy and further develop actually these techniques. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. So just some words of closing. Thank you, Jean-Pierre. Great talk. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you here and online. The next event's coming. We have Professor Malamud speaking the 1st of November, Professor Herzog the 29th of November. We have a colloquia coming with Susan Murphy from Harvard University on 13th of December. And please don't miss the CIS Digital Twin Days, 15th, 16th November, 150 tickets on site. If you're EPFL, that's for free. Just sign up for it, and we're happy to welcome you. You see a selection of the speakers we're going to have. So fantastic talks and a panel at the end. Okay, thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon and talk soon. Bye.